All right, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Not bad, not bad. Get ready, because I'm going to take you on a journey into a remarkable story this afternoon. And to start this journey, I'd like you to be thinking about 3 questions. So question number 1, would you be willing to help others whose lives are in great danger? Think about that for a moment. It's actually a tough question. Question 2, would you be willing to help others whose lives are in great danger, knowing if you get involved, you probably put your life in great danger? Would you still help? And question 3, would you be willing to help others whose lives are in great danger, knowing if you get involved, you probably put your life in great danger, when these people who most need the help, most everybody else wants to hate them or be indifferent to their plight? Would you still get involved and help? And as you see the book up here, Two Among the Righteous Few, a story of courage in the Holocaust, is a true story of a Christian couple that answered a definite yes to all 3 of those questions in a time period when most everybody else said no. They are true heroes. And I always say, to give this book its just due, I should say its title is this: 2000 rechtvaardige enkelen, een verhaal van moed in de Holocaust. That's the title of this book, translated into Dutch. For the story takes place in the Netherlands, commonly referred to as Holland, during World War II and the Holocaust. And this couple was a young married couple, and I'll introduce you to them now. We'll go to the next slide, please. There they are. Frans and Mein Wijnakker. And the W in Dutch is more of a V sound. Frans and Mein Wijnakker. And that's a picture of them, 1945, at the end of World War II. Just a young married couple. And who were they, in brief? We'll go to the next slide. That's who they were. You see the first line of that. Nothing special about them. Not college educated, no success in business, no great inventions. In fact, chances are if you went throughout the Netherlands today, in most every town and city away from their own local area, most people would go, who are they? They wouldn't know them. But you see the second half of that statement. They are going to do things with courage and compassion that we can learn lessons from in our lives today. Which is why I'm here sharing this story. And I've been keep doing this for quite a while. So in a moment, as I'm going to take you into the story, and we'll go back to their picture, or go forward to their picture. There they are. I'm going to be taking you on a journey about these 2 humble people who are, in the end, you're going to find out, amazing heroes. And as I'm going to take you into the story in a moment, I'm going to first paint the historical picture around it. World War II in Europe, the Holocaust, and life in the Netherlands during World War II when it was under Nazi Germany occupation, the worst of all the countries in Western Europe. That picture I'll paint first will help you understand when I talk about who they were and what they end up doing that later will earn them a heroic honor. You're going to see how remarkable and unusual it was. And the last thing I'll cover in my presentation, as you heard in the introduction, I have a very meaningful personal connection to this story and its heroes, one I understand so much more in depth today than before I ever got involved with this. But I always save that for last. And then your questions will be most welcome, and we'll do the book signing afterwards. But I'm going to pause before I get into this story. I'm very grateful to be here today. In fact, never expected to be here today, which I'll explain in a moment. But first I want to cover why the grateful part of it, because these things don't happen by myself. I got an invitation, please come to Northern Nevada. I want to have you share your story out here, and I'll help organize some events for you. And actually, I met her about 6 months ago because of this movie thing, too, that we're trying to do, as I'm going to talk a little bit more in a moment. She's saying, I can help connect you to some resources, and so she's become a wonderful supporter and helped me set this all today. So I want to please give a thank you, everybody, to this wonderful lady over here, Tony Setti. Thank you very much. And some of you know her already, which is terrific. Also, thank you if you're with Integrity Casting, Tony's company, and you're part of the people that are making this weekend wonderful for me. Raise your hand. Luke, Dave, Debbie, there she is. Good, good. Thank you. These people have been helping me throughout. This is my 3rd of 3 events here in Northern Nevada. Tony said, I want to make sure I run you ragged while you're here. When I say, I'm very grateful for this, let me explain why. This is actually a story I stumbled into by accident on a trip to the Netherlands in May of 2009. And as you heard in the introduction, so different than what my work has been with this management consulting business. Nothing to do with it. In fact, if you'd gone into my life prior to that moment of time, of May of 2009, and said, one day you're going to write a book about this couple named Frans and Mein Wijnakker, I would have looked at you kind of strange and funny, like, who are they and why would I do that? Never would have believed it. And not only will you end up writing a book about it and be lucky enough to find a publisher one day, but when the book comes out, fall 2011 is when it came out, it's going to send you on this unexpected journey, sharing the story in a wide variety of venues, churches, synagogues, brewery art centers, people's homes, schools, libraries, bookstores, Rotary clubs, various kinds of social service organizations, etc. It's going to take over your life, much to my wife's chagrin sometimes. In fact, today, and now 2 3/4 years into this journey, this today marks event number 283 for me. It has definitely taken over my life, and the reason I keep going, because audiences have kept telling me, please keep telling that story. Its messages, its values are wonderful. And I've had audiences even encourage me over the last couple of years, you ever thought about getting this made into a movie? Yeah, nice idea. I didn't snap my fingers, it happened. No. But in the last few months, I've actually started to make some efforts in finally getting some people who can really help me. And one of those, she's based in Los Angeles, actually came up to this weekend to support me through all this. I actually now have a producer on board helping me from Funches Productions. Jessica Funches right here. Fantastic. Never would expect it, and it's in simple terms, I get to be the humble messenger for these two heroes. So let me get you into the story now. And we're going to start by painting a historical picture in which it takes place. So I'm going to throw you some questions. It's okay to guess. Not right, that's all right. But if it's guessed correctly, see Giselle over here. She's been following me around this whole time. She's a wonderful supporter now. So she should know the answers anyway. You're going to give out prizes if they get it right. All right? You didn't know you were going to do that today. So here's my first question. The story takes place during World War II in Europe. When does World War II in Europe begin and where? Good guess, but not quite there yet. 1939? Poland. Yes. What's happened in Poland in September 1st of 39? What happened there? Who's they? Yes, Germany. Germany has invaded Poland September 1st, 1939. Boom. World War II breaks out. Because the other powers of Europe at that time, Britain and France, declare war against Germany because of its invasion of Poland. Interesting enough, Britain and France will offer little aid to Poland. Poland falls in a month, and the war actually stopped for a period of time. In fact, if you looked at headlines around the world during this time period for about the next 6 months, here's one you'd see in papers fairly often. Phony war! This war must not be real because Britain and France said they're going to go attack Germany, and they sat there. Not a good strategy, because this war will not just stay quiet with just a few countries involved. By spring of 1940, it starts to erupt and keeps erupting, and will finally end in Europe when? 45. And when in 1945? August, hold that thought. That was Japan. Very good, very good. Very close, Roger. Very good, very good, good, good. People know their months. Yes, yes. May of 45, it ends in Europe. August 45, when Japan and Asia surrenders, it's finally done worldwide. Well, this war, still true today with all wars before and all wars since, is the most destructive war in humankind's history by far. When it's finally over, you're going to have over 60 countries commit troops into this war, billions of dollars of property damage worldwide, and nearly 55 million people are going to die in this awful war, the most by far ever. And one of the things that we saw in this war that we had not quite seen in wars before it, even though we've seen death and destruction in wars before, is over half of that figure, nearly 30 million, will be civilians. So many of the places where the war is being fought, it's not out in battlefields. It's coming into your neighborhood, whether you're taking sides or not. Especially true if you live in the continent of Europe. There's not a single country in Europe during this time period, over 30 that are there, that is not going to be terribly impacted by this awful war over a 5.5-year period, because nearly 2/3 of the death and destruction of this awful war takes place in Europe. For the average citizen living in Europe during this time period, for this over 5-year period, your life is basically a nightmare. Good luck if you want to be there. You don't. And that's where Frans and Mein Wijnakker live. A bad neighborhood. Europe is awful. Now, my next question is we look at the historical picture behind the story. Holocaust, capital H, the event. When does that start and where? Go ahead, make your guess. Make your guess.
I think it started in 39.
Ah, good guess. And it's actually been going on before the war starts.
Well, that's true. But I mean...
No, but you're on the right track. So it's before 39.
In Germany.
Yes, she's got the right country where it begins. What year? Kristallnacht is one of the events, tragic events in the Holocaust. That's November of 38, and it's already been going on for a few years prior to that. So keep guessing, keep guessing. Your right place, before 38. You're 35, getting very warm.
29.
Cold. Somewhere between 29 and 35. Thank you, Giselle. All right, 1933, in Germany, yes. Here's the beginnings of it. And this part always frightens me when I speak of it. Through the democratic process, this man gets appointed chancellor, which is like prime minister. And a short time after coming into power, into that post, he creates excuses to throw democracy out the window. One-party dictatorship rule takes over. And the persecution that becomes part of the Holocaust, including a couple of concentration camps, starts right away there in the early part of 1933. Of course, who am I talking about? That's right. Adolf Hitler now is in power, and the persecution that becomes part of the Holocaust begins right then. Now, the Holocaust will not just stay in Germany. Before the war even begins in September 39, it is now spread into Austria and then Czechoslovakia. And then when the war breaks out in September of 39, boom, it spreads throughout all of Europe and to North Africa, and finally ends when? May of when? Very good. When World War II in Europe ends, the Holocaust ends. Two separate events, but they're going to be happening on simultaneous tracks. They will impact each other. More the war on the Holocaust than the other way around, unfortunately. May of 45, it finally is over. In fact, in one sentence, define, what was the Holocaust, the event? In one sentence, what was it?
Genocide.
In one word, that summarizes it quite well. Anything else that people would add?
Who were the people?
Yeah, who were they? Who was the genocide over?
Jews.
All right, let's put this together then.
Primarily.
Primarily, that's right. There will be others we'll talk about in a moment. Jews were the number one target on the list. We'll talk about that in a moment here. Let me put all this together and give you the whole sentence of defining the event, the Holocaust. This was a nation-sponsored, systematic, and racist effort to persecute, isolate, then mass murder, genocide, millions of people on Adolf Hitler's list of so-called undesirables or inferiors. When the Holocaust was finally over after 12 plus miserable years, you're going to have over 11 million people murdered in the Holocaust, on top of what's happening in the war itself when it breaks out. Jews, yes, were the top of the list of the targets. They're going to be 6 million out of that 11 million plus figure. That figure alone, 6 million, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. That's nearly 3/4 of the population of the San Francisco Bay Area. Frightening when you think about it. And they go to Europe, 1933. That's nearly 2 out of every 3 European Jew who lives on the continent at the beginning of 1933. They will not be alive by May of 45. Among the other people, now we'll go to what you're starting to raise. Among the other 5 million plus victims, who were some of them?
The gypsies,
Very good.
the Catholics.
No and yes. Because, by the way, Hitler didn't see religion. It just happened to be some of those people were Catholics. It's not because they were Catholic.
Gypsies.
Gypsies already mentioned, yes, keep going. We'll come back to that point about who happened to be Catholics. It wasn't because they were Catholic. For him, it was race or politics. Jehovah's Witnesses, yes. And that fits to the same thing of some of those who are Catholics. Jehovah's Witnesses is another religion. It wasn't because of the religion. But those folks in Germany of the Jehovah's Witness faith did not march along. They spoke out against this. Boom! They became targets. Basically, to what you're getting at. If you were a political dissident or opponent, you were a target. In addition,
There were also Germans that spoke out and were
well, again, political dissidents and opponents, yes. In Germany and other parts of Europe. Yes, not a lot in Germany, by the way, but there were some. Keep going.
Aren't there folks like with physical impediments?
And mental, physical handicap. Very good. Very good. Good list. You can see it's a big list here. Here's a list that many of these people happen to be Catholic. People of Slavic heritage. That takes in a number of nationalities throughout Europe. The largest group out of that, non-Jewish Poles, who are primarily Catholic. Over 1.5 million of them. It was a big list! And if you're on this list during this time period, Jews being the top list of the targets, not only is your life a nightmare, you're doomed in many cases. It's too late before you can figure out what's going on. You've been captured, you're going to be murdered. But if you could figure out what's going on in time, and some will, because a refugee crisis breaks out in Europe before the war's even started in September of 39, and it only gets worse when the war starts to spread throughout the continent. So if you could figure out, you're one of these refugees trying to get out, seeking countries to help. If you went to governments, because you're going to need them to help, and the countries, for example, who could most help these refugees in dire need, United States, Canada, Great Britain, for example. How many governments were willing to help these refugees in dire need during this time period? That's right. That's right. You're not going to see much of it at all. Not at that time period. Later, Denmark will do some things, although it's not through the government. They're going to have people. In fact, to your right on cue, thank you. There is going to be a handful of people, not governments, throughout the continent of Europe, let alone the world, but only a handful, that will have the courage and compassion to say, this is wrong, I should try to help. This couple was among those few. So unusual. Now, my last main question, we look at the historical picture behind this story. Let's go to when the United States enters World War II. When was that?
41.
Yes, and when in 1941? All right, very good. In fact, well, to be exact, December 8th, because of what happened on December 7th, which was? Americans know that one well. Japan has attacked our naval base there in Hawaii. And on December 8th, we declared war against Japan because of that. Well, Japan is part of this alliance known as the Axis powers, with Italy and Germany. And those two countries turn around and declare war against the United States. We say, all right, vice versa to you. And we're finally going to enter this war, which, let's take you back into Europe now. Late 1941, the war is already over 2 years old in Europe before the United States is even going to get into it. What's the situation of the war in Europe in this point in time, late 41? What's happened? Who's winning?
Germany.
Yes, and other allies with them, but they're the primary force. And how much are they winning? A lot. I love the big words. That summarizes it so well. Yes, yes. They're winning a whole bunch. In fact, they're winning so much. You know how many countries in Europe are still standing trying to fight them? How many are left? No, there are some left.
Sweden was not, it's.
That's a neutral, so they're not fighting. So they're not fighting them.
Switzerland's neutral.
Yeah, no, we'll hold the neutrals because they're not fighting against them. Britain, yes.
France, Belgium.
No, they're gone. Roll. No, they didn't last long at all. In fact, let's go to the map of Europe, please. Yeah, and that wasn't called Russia then. Russia's a state within it called, and you're going to see it on the far right, USSR, Soviet Union. Those are the only two that are left. And how are they doing? Not good. Let's go to Great Britain, which you can see in the dark. In fact, before you do that, just so you can pick up on the colors, the other one's kind of the semi-dark in the bottom half. There's actually other countries now that have joined the Axis power alliance. Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, for example, Finland up north. You were mentioning before, the ones that are kind of more white are the few neutrals. Spain, Portugal, Sweden, Switzerland, Turkey. You know what the neutrals are doing, though? They're actively providing materials to the Germans to support their war effort, hoping they don't turn around and attack them. And all that's left is these two, because, by the way, mighty France, someone mentioned France, mighty France, they've surrendered in less than a month after they got attacked. Phew. They're not proud of that. Great Britain, how are they doing? When I said not good, here's what's happened for them by the end of 1941. They've been bombed and battered repeatedly. The British people are wondering when all this is going to ever be over. Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister, trying to rally their spirits. But they're nervous because they're wondering when German forces are going to come over the North Sea and start attacking with troops. Uh-oh. Now, Soviet Union is even worse off. Because if you actually look at that map of Europe itself, it looks like there is no Soviet Union left. Because it looks like, because all the rest of that is all under Germany control. There's nearly 20 countries now conquered by Germany. And then they got others that have joined them. Because you see what's happening in the Soviet Union. The Asia part is okay, which you don't see on that map. The European portions, in the last 6 months of 1941, if you go to Poland over there, Germany's now overrun Poland, they just continued east. And now they're within 20 miles of the capital, Moscow. Very much the European portions of the Soviet Union have been conquered. That's life in Europe before the United States even shows up. Basically, the grip on this continent under the terrorism of Nazi Germany is so entrenched. It is the most frightening time possibly in the world's history before the United States has even showed up. And this is where Frans and Mein Wijnakker lived. What's it mean for the Holocaust? The Holocaust has now entered its third and final phase, known as the final solution. The mass murder or genocide phase is in full blast. In the last 6 months of 1941, as German forces kept conquering from Poland east, what comes in behind them? Murder squads. 1.5 million people have been shot to death, primarily Jews. By the start of 42, you've got hundreds of concentration camps all over the place, lots in Poland, and the 6 major death camps. That's their primary focus, murder people. They're all up and running in Poland. In fact, what summarizes this time period? We'll go to the next slide, please. There it is. When hate rules the day, death and destruction follow. And one of the words, and I'll even talk to you folks about it, and when I go into schools, this is one of the things teachers love because we talk about this because I deal with middle school and high school kids. Indifference is part of that life when they call them teenagers. And we talk about what that word means. And please don't allow that to get into your adulthood because it does for many. What's the word indifference mean?
Simply don't care.
That's right. What perpetuated the Holocaust, being as destructive as it was, so many people, millions upon millions upon millions, let indifference take over. They didn't care. Who cares what's going on? Don't bother me with it. Frans and Mein Wijnakker were different from most. They cared. Now I'm going to take you to their country. Let's go to Holland, please. There it is. I always say we had a contest. We went back to the big map of Europe, and I said, okay, first one to find Holland on the map wins. It might take somebody about 10 minutes, because in area-wise, it's not big. It's a small country area-wise. You drive 3-4 hours in any direction, you've hit the whole country. Anybody ever been to the Netherlands? Oh, good, a few of you have. Of those who've been to the Netherlands, good, about 5 or 6 of you. You've gotten past Amsterdam. Who's gotten past Amsterdam? Because that's the big tourist spot, of course. Oh, good, a lot of you have. Okay, so you know, it's not a big country. I'll be coming back to you later for geography assistance. So get ready. Now, this country, which is, by the way, very densely populated, though. 9 million prior to the war, and today over 60 million. It's the most densely populated country in Europe today. Well, when the war broke out in September of '39, the Dutch government said, we're going to be neutral. They were neutral during World War I and left out of it, hoping for the same. Now, there's this small country to the south of the Netherlands. Smaller in size, also densely populated, called, as you'll see there, Belgium. I said, yes, we want to be neutral too. But that will not be their choice. This major country on their eastern border, you're seeing a sliver of it there, called Germany. They're going to make the decisions of who will be left neutral and who not. In the wee hours of May 10th, 1940, German forces come over the eastern border of the Netherlands attacking. Now the Dutch government recognized neutrality wasn't going to be honored. They knew the attack was coming sooner or later. So they had troops in place and they put up a fight, which the Germans did not like. They thought Holland would just roll over right away. Now, poor little Holland, though, will get no aid from the so-called powers of Britain and France. France we talked about in a moment. A week later, France comes under attack. They surrender in less than a month. Little Holland, with no assistance, will surrender in less than... Dave, no, what, pardon me? Oh, no, they did. Yeah. It didn't go long. And as Dave is flashing over there, yes, he's heard the talk now before. Less than 1 week. That's it. And by the way, and Dave reminds me of this, as I've been on this journey now, coming on close to 3 years, occasionally I've had children in the audience, or members of the audience who were children in the Netherlands at this time. And before I even finish asking the question, sometimes they're yelling out, 5 days! They remember it like it was yesterday. The scars run deep. Well, here's what's happening as the week is rolling on. Even though the Dutch forces are putting up a pretty good fight, they're outmanned and outgunned, but they're fighting hard. The German commanders turned to the Dutch government and said, ultimatum, here's your choice. You either surrender now or we start bombing. And we're going to go after your commercial port city of Rotterdam. It may be hard just to do the distance, but Rotterdam is south of Amsterdam in the west. We're going to hit that city first. So what are you going to do? So the Prime Minister, in consultation with his cabinet and with the Queen, Queen Wilhelmina, they talked it over and they said, you know what, Dutch generals? We don't want that bombing and destruction on our Dutch soil, so you surrender to the German commanders. Oh, by the way, we're leaving. They're going to duck out the day before the official surrender, and across the North Sea they go to a place called London, England. They will be a government in exile for the rest of the war. Good luck, Dutch people. Not they go. Dutch generals followed their orders. And they surrendered. And the Germans said, thank you very much. Back to my people who've been to the Netherlands. How many of you ever got to Rotterdam? All right. What's Rotterdam look like today?
Well, this has been 25 years ago. It's a port city.
Yeah. Does it look like the rest of the cities in Holland in terms of the historic look? No. I was just there last year. And it's even more, you'll see. Nicely developed. It looks like one of these boring American cities. Because it looks very modern. Not historic like so many of the cities throughout Europe are, because it got bombed to smithereens. The Germans said, oh, excuse us, we had this miscommunication. 1,000 people are killed. 85,000 left homeless. The industrial center of the city wiped out. That's why I was asking, because it doesn't look like the rest. It doesn't fit in that country now. It's a very modern looking city, because it took years, it's rebuilt. But so it's not, all that gets lost. And a new beginning happens in the Netherlands. It now becomes under the control and occupation of Nazi Germany. The Germans will put their own man in charge as the ruling governor. Like Adolf Hitler, he was an Austrian Nazi named Arthur Seyss-Inquart. And he will rule this country with his henchmen for 5 miserable years. The longest of all the countries in Western Europe. And the most miserable. And what you're going to see during this time period, because each year, by the way, of the occupation will be worse than the one before it. 4 main areas of emphasis of how the Germans ran this country, typical of many of the countries they occupied. 1, control the flow of information. Because I control the news and information you get, I control your mind, I can keep you compliant. That was their objective, keep the population compliant and submissive. Well, in those days, that's going to be easier to do. Because, by the way, what were the major sources of how people got their news in those days? Newspaper and? That's it, just those 2 primary sources. And television wasn't quite there yet, coming soon. Internet, as I always like to point out, Al Gore hadn't invented it yet. So it's going to be easier to control. So what you're going to see in terms of newspapers, censorship, Nazi propaganda takes over. Radios. By the end of 1940, they've already issued a nationwide order. Don't listen to your radio. You can look at it, don't listen to it. Now that's a hard one to enforce. And here's what's bothering the Germans as the war is progressing. They think a lot of Dutch are ignoring that order and listening to the radios, even though we told them not to. And by the way, if you are, by mid-1943, you're getting these secret broadcasts coming in. The BBC out of London. Radio Orange out of London. That's the Dutch government in exile's own radio station, where the Queen will even come on at times to broadcast. And if you're listening by mid-1943 to those secret broadcasts, here's what you're going to hear. The truth about the war. A year and a half before, the Germans are dominating the continent. Now, they're starting to suffer defeat after defeat on the battlefield. The Germans don't want people in the Netherlands to know this. They don't want to give them any hope. September 1943, nationwide edict by the German authorities. All Dutch citizens, turn in your radios. Good luck trying to collect radios out of 9 million people, but they're going to work hard to do it. Interesting thing about Frans Wijnakker. He hid his radio. He never turned it in. Frans was different than the average person who just follows rules as they're told. He had this independent spirit to him. Keep that in mind. Now, second emphasis of how they ran the country was this. Exploit all resources. Well, the Netherlands is fairly well developed economically and even more so today, so there's resources to be had. Parts, machinery, raw materials, food. And they take it from the Netherlands and ship it off to Germany. What for? Yes, and all the war machine you need to manufacture to support your armies. Yes. By the way, they didn't care what the economic effect was on your country. They just took. And here's one of the problems also for the Germans. And this is what was also scary in terms of economic exploitation. People. See, the Germans have a labor shortage now. To support this huge war machine that they had, you needed a lot of people to work in the factories and the fields to support it. And the Germans, in terms of all the able-bodied young men that would have been doing those jobs, let alone some of those able-bodied young women, they weren't around to do them. Where were they? No. They were in the army. That's right. And actually 2 wars. The military one we called World War II, they had millions of soldiers in that. This other thing we call the Holocaust, again, it took thousands and thousands and millions of people to run all those hundreds of concentration camps. So how did they make up for the labor shortage? Here was the way they did it. The term for it was forced labor. I mean, you got a call that said, you go work in Germany to do those jobs. That was one of the scariest things for the Dutch during this time period. During the course of the war, 350,000 Dutch citizens went into forced labor. They went to work in Germany to do these jobs. 30,000 don't come home alive when this is over. Some come home disabled. That was not a job assignment you want. By the way, Frans Wijnakker got notice. He's supposed to report to medical evaluation and then on to work in Germany. If he goes away, we're going to talk about in a few minutes, he gets involved in doing, it's doomed. If he's not there, a major obstacle he has to overcome. Now, a third emphasis of how they ran the country was this. Stamp out resistance in any form it shows. Now, when the Dutch get conquered, they're not ready to resist anyway. We wouldn't be if it happened here tomorrow, but in time you're going to start to see things. Protests, strikes. You're going to see about a half dozen throughout the war. Don't get involved, though, because of the way the Germans responded. For instance, for those who've been to Amsterdam, the city people visit most, today, if you were there and it's what was in the old Jewish section, you're going to see a big statue of a dock worker. It's known as the worker strike, late February 1941. Here's the backstory to it. Prior to the strike happening, the Germans had rounded up out of Amsterdam over 400 young Jewish men and shipped them off to a concentration camp. First time they had taken that action. And why did they go after these young Jewish men? Because they were fighting back against Dutch Nazi hoodlums. trying to terrorize the Jewish population. They beat the you-know-what out of them. Boom, we don't like that, ship them off. Now this is what surprised the Germans, because this will be one of the rarest occasions this occurs throughout Europe through this whole time period. Non-Jews rose up for an action taken against Jews. And it was organized by one of the first resistance groups to really get going in the Netherlands, the Communists. They said, dock workers, let's go out and strike to protest what they did to our fellow Jews. Well, it's not just dock workers that go out and strike. You've got people throughout the city just hitting the streets to protest against this brutal, oppressive rule by the Nazi German authorities. Day 2, the strike has now hit a half dozen cities around the country. The Germans are extremely upset with this big disturbance. How do they deal with it? Here's how. And you're going to see this again in other strikes. They just move troops in and crush it. They make massive arrests, and they go after the ringleaders they think were responsible for instigating this awful disturbance. By the way, they don't care where they get that right. And those so-called ringleaders will all be executed. And that starts to be a common response that you're going to start to see. And as the Dutch pick up more resistance efforts, like they had a major spy ring going on with British. And for over 2 years, they were getting duped by German counterintelligence that was capturing them. Over nearly 500 get captured, including 50 British agents. And what happens to most of those people that get captured? They will be executed before the war's out. You want to get involved in the resistance? Well, in time, because it took a while, you're going to see some resistance groups of core people get organized and do some of those dangerous forms, not only spying, hit and run attacks. You don't want them in your neighborhood because of the reprisals by the Nazi authorities. For instance, February 1943, one of the high-ranking Nazi officials, who was a Dutch general, former Dutch general traitor, he's stationed in the capital city of The Hague. And one night in February 1943, his doorbell rings, he opens it up, 2 Dutch resistance fighters target him, shot him dead. When the head of the SS operations in the Netherlands, and that's the security arm of the Nazi machine to enforce its will on the people, when he got wind of it, it was a man named Hans Rauter, the most brutal and feared man in the country. When he got wind of this, he ordered 50 people rounded up and executed and made sure the public knew this. And this will be the start of a reign of terror that will be commonplace in the Netherlands throughout the rest of 1943, 1944, until the war ends in May of 45. That's life in the Netherlands. Who wants to live there? Well, that's where Frans and Mein Wijnakker live. Now, I said there were 4 main areas of emphasis. I've covered 3. Here's the 4th. And it was the #1 priority. Persecute. Isolate. Round up those who are already living in the major city of Amsterdam and put them in there into ghettos, and then deport them on the trains to the death camps in Poland, the entire Jewish population they could get their hands on. Well, the Jewish population in the Netherlands prior to the occupation was approximately 1.5% of the total. This doesn't happen all at once, but it builds up over time. And before 1940's out, early edicts that target Jews begin. Here was one of the early ones. All Jews in the Netherlands, if you work in government positions or university positions like professors, you're now out of a job because you're a Jew. Where there were not that many Dutch Jews in those roles yet, not that many in their history had begun to achieve these levels of prominence. But the handful that had were affected, and the most prominent Jew in the country was one of them. His name was Lodewijk Visser. His job was equivalent to the job of John Roberts in our country today. What's he do? Yes, of the American Supreme Court. Well, Lodewijk Visser had an equivalent role on the Dutch High Court. By the end of November 1940, he's now out of a job because he's a Jew, and his fellow justices, in response, said, that's correct, that's what they said. Nothing. Green light for the Germans, great, they're not going to care what we do to the Jews, let's continue, and they will. And throughout all of 1941, edict after edict gets passed targeting Jews, that by the end of 1941, here's the effect. The Jewish population now has been isolated and removed from the non-Jewish population. Going to school with, can't do. Working with, can't do. Own your own business, taken away. Go out and enjoy social and recreational activities like the rest of the population, cannot do. Jews are prohibited. By 1942, if you weren't already in Amsterdam, you've now been placed into the city, into ghettos. And by July of 1942, the trains are cranking, and they're taking the Jewish population from Amsterdam bit by bit and shipping them off to the death camps in Poland, primarily Sobibor and Auschwitz. Now, the Germans were masters of propaganda. So the message they told the whole population, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, was this: we're sending them to work camps in Germany. False. And to reinforce that propaganda, Some of those early arrivals to those death camps, if they survived the train rides, when they got off, they had postcards for them already filled out. All you had to do was sign your name. And this, in effect, was the message on the postcards. Dear friends and family, life at the camp is not so bad. Yeah, you have to work, but that's really not so bad. And the food's decent, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Now that goes back to the people waiting anxiously in Amsterdam. I guess they don't need to worry after all. And this is just going to keep continuing. By the end of September of 1943, the entire Jewish population they could get their hands on out of the Netherlands had been deported to the death camps. But they knew they didn't get them all. If you could figure out what was going on, because many people had no idea, but if you could figure out what's going on and what's coming, your best hope as a Jew in the Netherlands, go into hiding. But you're going to need help for that. Would anybody help? Contrary to popular beliefs, the answer to that question is not many. In fact, you know what the vast majority of the Dutch are trying to do during this period of occupation they're living under? What are they trying to do? That's it. They're just trying to survive. I hope I don't get called into forced labor. I hope I can just still put food in my family and have a job. Don't bother me what's happening to anybody else. By the way, even though many of the Dutch were very anti-German, the Germans liked them because many of them were actually helping the Germans just by doing the jobs, even though they didn't like them. For example, I work in the government, in the civil service jobs, and you're asking me to keep information on the population and especially help you identify who the Jews are? I'm doing it because I'm just following orders. I work for the police. You ask me to go on raids as we round up Jews? I'm just following orders, going on raids. In fact, I'll give you even another example. The railway workers. They're helping greatly because they're just shipping out all the economic material and now shipping out all the Jews, keeping the trains running for them. Interesting enough, the Dutch government exile finally got word to these folks and encouraged them finally to say, railway workers, go on strike. Stop helping. The last major strike in the Netherlands. Fall 1944. The railway workers go, okay, yes, we will stop helping. All right, we're going on strike, Germans. And the Germans said, fine. We'll use our own trucks and trains to get supplies. And they're primarily in the major cities in the West, is where the greatest concentration is. We'll take care of it. Sorry for you folks who live out there, which is over a third of the population. Good luck to you. This will be, and when I talk about this, and if I've met people who were in the Netherlands or had family there, they start crying at this point. Because what happens now, the hunger winter, the last winter of the war, is not only colder than usual, you've got over a third of the country that is now starting to starve to death. Going on scavenger hunts, seeking food, burning furniture because you're not getting fuel brought in, trying to survive. Over 15,000 die in this hunger winter. That's life in the Netherlands. Well, I'm saying this is the vast majority of the population. And now, in that population, by the way, even though they're not going to get involved and they're indifferent, you had some people that felt sympathetic to what was happening to their fellow Jews because they see the persecution going on. But if you rang their doorbell and said, please help me, they would not open their door. How come? I want to explain. What happens if I open my door and say, here, come on in, I'll help hide you? Yes, yes. Yes, and if you get involved and get caught for trying to help those we're after, especially Jews, what happens to you?
You're killed or taken to camp.
Most often you're deported to the camps, which you're going to die sooner or later there. In Poland, we may shoot you on the spot. So, can't blame them. They don't want to get involved. This is approximately, we'll say, 96 to 97% of the population. Approximately 2% or so of the population that's playing an active role in the war among the Dutch, I'm going to put them in two groups. Everybody see my hands? You notice the one on the left is a little bit more than the one on the right. The one on the right, people in the resistance groups. So I'll save them for last. The one on the left, the sympathizers and collaborators with the Nazis. One thing that is often overlooked, as Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party go conquering throughout all of Europe, they had a lot of help in most every country from the locals. What was existing in Europe already in many of the countries, even in the United States had a little one going. Little fascist or Nazi-like parties were already existing, including in the Netherlands. The initials for their Dutch Nazi party was NSB. Prior to the war, at most, 5,000 NSBers. And the Dutch, who don't like political extremists, right-wingers or left-wingers, ignored them as extremist idiots, and that's pretty much what they were, harmless. Now the occupation is a year into it. 100,000 people have signed up and joined the NSB. How come? Because they want to be on the winning team. Because there's opportunity now, positions of power to be had. You don't get the strict food rationing cards like everybody else. You're going to eat better, and you don't get called into forced labor. You're helping on the winning team. Especially in these hard economic times, those are great jobs to be had. And by the way, you want to make some extra money in this time period? Here's a great way to do it. If you suspect something going on over there, just call the authorities. And if they find out, certainly those people hiding people were after, especially Jews, they paid bounties for it. So you didn't have to be an NSB. A lot of just sympathizers and say, I'll be on the good side of the Germans, sure, help out. In fact, here's one group. This NSB offshoot group, known as the Wijnakker column. In 1943, they were very active. They were bounty hunters. Because they know they didn't get all the Jews. So the Wijnakker column, started by a man named Wim Wijnakker, he and his band of bounty hunters are going around the country. They get over 8,000 Jews captured, arrested, deported. Bounty, 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 bounty. Oh, they were making good money. That's a good little chunk of the population. This other group I mentioned, resistance. Here's one of the problems for the Dutch with their resistance efforts. There wasn't one group. In time, you're going to see about a half dozen resistance groups get formed, come, go. And here was one of the problems for me. Get ready, my Netherlands visitors, because I'm going to ask you to help with geography here in a moment. These groups were never united with each other. Only a few towards the end of the war. None of them had the firepower to ever match the Germans. And by the way, if you're in these resistance groups, especially doing the dangerous things like hit and run attacks, unlike other parts of Europe that have major mountain ranges, you could go run in, they'll never find you there, or deep forest, you'll never be found there. In the Netherlands, for those who've been past Amsterdam, how many deep forests or big mountain ranges have you found there? That's right, they don't exist. It's a flat country pretty much. Great for bike riding. They have bike paths all over the country. Lots of water. So if you can hold your breath a long time, you're going to do just fine. Well, so what's happening to many of these core people in these resistance groups? They're getting caught, arrested, deported, executed. Many of them got to go into hiding. And please don't be in my neighborhood because the reprisals will come on us who have nothing to do with it. Of all the resistance groups in the Netherlands, the one that will become the most effective was known by its initials LO. Full name in Dutch, Landelijke Organisatie voor Hulp aan de Duikers. English translation, the National Organization for Helping People in Hiding. During the course of the war, the LO will help hide from the German authorities 300,000 people. Quite effective. By the time they really got going and had a network around the country, it was mid-1943. Too late to help many of the Jews. At best, about 30,000 Jews make it into hiding. But here was the problem for them. They're the number one target. Over a third of them will get caught and deported. So those non-Jews willing to get involved in this very risky and dangerous business of trying to help people the authorities are after, you had far more non-Jews helping non-Jews hide than helping Jews hide. That's almost like touching poison. I don't know if I want to go that far. Frans and Mein Wijnakker, though, were a little different. And I'm going to introduce you to them now, and I'm first going to we'll go to the book cover. And as you see again, the title of the book, Two Among the Righteous Few, A Story of Courage in the Holocaust. The book cover was being designed by my publisher. The person whose job that was called me. And she said, as I'm about to design your cover, I want to understand the meaning of your title so I can design the cover accordingly. And I think she did a great job of capturing the mood of this story. Well, I said, if you look at the various words in this title, the word that is the most significant is the word righteous. And it comes from a place called, we'll see the next slide, Yad Vashem. Anybody ever heard of the place? Yes, great.
I've been there.
And you've been there, great. Anybody heard of the place but not been there? All right. Oh, Roger, you have. Do you know what it is? It's okay if you don't know. Heard it, but not sure what it is. Okay. You've been there, what is it?
It's basically a memorial.
It's more than a memorial.
Well, to the 6 million Jews, plus the people who helped them.
And among other things, yes. It's all related to what?
The Holocaust.
There we go. And it's a museum. Memorial and educational museum related to the Holocaust. Located
In Israel.
in Jerusalem, Israel. It was established in 1953, the first of its kind when it was established. Today there's hundreds of Holocaust museums of large and smaller little education centers around the world, many in the United States included. But in 1953, way ahead of when this was something you would talk about, let alone study. Now this museum, I've been there twice myself. 18 years apart, the last time 4 years ago, and it was really greatly expanded. It's very moving, very educational about the Holocaust. And the thing that always strikes me about it, it's not just people who live in Israel that visit there. In fact, far more who don't live in Israel visit there every day. People from around the world. It's fascinating to see that. Well, within the museum, there's one section, and it's called, we'll see the next slide, The Righteous Among the Nations. That's where the word righteous comes from in my book title. And in the grounds outside of it that connect to that term, righteous among the nations, they refer to it as the avenue of the righteous, because what you're going to see there are plaques and trees planted to these people who've gotten what is, this is a very heroic honor of righteous among the nations. And you'll see their plaque in the avenue of the righteous. Who were such people? These were non-Jews who during the course of the Holocaust were willing to risk their lives to try to help save the lives of Jews. And I think, do you have the book title next there? All right, never mind. Anyway, if you go back to my book title, don't worry if you do, is again, it's two among the righteous few, not two among the righteous many. It's not a lot who've gotten this honor, because there weren't a lot who did this. Now, one that I think most of you would be aware of. He's one of the first to receive this honor of righteous among the nations, and thanks to the movies, we know him even better. 1993 Academy Award-winning movie was? Very good, in honor of Oskar Schindler, one of the first to receive this honor. Now we'll go to the next slide, please. Frans and Mein Wijnakker, Hermine, her full name, Mean for short, they are two Oskar Schindlers. They too received this heroic honor for what they did during the course of the war and the Holocaust in the Netherlands. When this honor, there's their plaque from the Avenue of the Righteous, when it finally happened in their lives, it was late 1983. And unfortunately at that time, Mean, the wife, had already passed away. She died in 1980, so never knew about it. Frans, the husband, was still alive to receive the honor. He lives to 1994, almost the age of 86. So I'm going to talk about who they were and what they end up doing that later will earn this heroic honor. And we'll take it to their country of Holland. When the war broke out, they're a young married couple and they live over in southeastern Netherlands, and you can see that little red circle there. They live in a small town called Dieden, in an area of small town and villages. Much of the rest of the country is cities, large and small. Their area, much more countryside. And life for them in this area, like it was for most people there, was three things. One, raise a family. By the end of 1942, they already had 4 small children under the age of 5. I just see taking a parent coming in, you have 2. You want 2 more?
No, I'm good with these.
Yeah, yes. Okay, I mean, that thought alone makes you cringe if you're a parent. But that was important for them. Let's raise and have a big family. Second, what was important for them? Work hard. And they lived the traditional roles of the time period. As the woman, Mean, you run the household. Oh, she ran the household. Frans, as the husband, you work, support your family. He was a semi-skilled laborer. He worked one town over at a grain mill. Were they well off? No. Was anybody in the area? No. Were they okay? Did they get by? Yes. And the last thing that was important for them in this area, be good Catholics. In other parts of the country, be good Protestants. Those days, not only in Holland, but throughout Western Europe, the role of the church, very influential in people's lives, much less so today. And in their area, for instance, who was the number one authority figure? The local parish priest. When he tells you, you do it. When he says, don't do it, don't do it. And be at church every Sunday. So that's their lives. Pretty ordinary people, no different than anybody else in this area. Well, after the war breaks out, Frans will take a leave of absence from his job at the mill. And he thinks he can make a little bit more money by getting meat and eggs from farmers there in the countryside area where he lives. And then he travels on the train 2 hours to the west to Amsterdam, 2 hours west of the capital city, The Hague. And he's selling this food, which, by the way, is pretty scarce because the Germans have taken a lot of it away for their own use. So people in the cities, when they see this, are willing to pay for this very valuable and scarce food. By the way, this is black market business, really somewhat illegal. You're supposed to have these ration cards. He's not doing that. But he's a pretty good salesman doing it. Spring 1943. Frans is on one of these business trips in Amsterdam. And he's calling upon this doctor acquaintance he's done business with before. And before he leaves the meeting with the doctor turns to him and says, would you be willing to help? And the doctor explains. You see, we got this young girl hiding here in the city of Amsterdam. We'd love to get her out to the countryside where you live. What's your town again? Frans says, Dieden. Yes, let's say you take her out to Dieden for 3 weeks. That way she could get a little better fresh air and a little better food. Oh, and by the way, she's Jewish. So would you be willing to help? And this was Frans' response. Okay. Not exactly know what he's getting into, but he's a helpful guy and you've asked for help. Well, sure. So he's going to meet that young girl before the night is out. He only knows her by her false Dutch identity named Freetje. Freetje's 14, not far from her 15th birthday. Because she's small in stature, he thinks maybe she's 12. Now, by the way, the German presence and a lot of those NSBers, the Dutch Nazis, especially in the major cities, you don't sneak somebody out then during the daytime. Not even early evening. You go out much later at night. So Frans will not sneak Fretje out and get home on the train to Dieden until near midnight. There's no cell phones in those days. So when Frans is not home by supper time, take a guess what his wife Mean is thinking and feeling. Say that out loud. He's been caught. He's been arrested for this black market business. He's probably sitting in jail somewhere. How am I going to see my husband anytime soon? I'm not sleeping tonight. Yeah, she's very worried. And then about midnight, he shows up unannounced with his young girl, and he explains briefly to his wife, we're going to have this young girl stay with us here for 3 weeks. And this was Mean's response. Well, it's late. Let's get her to bed. He dodged a bullet there. And a new business has just begun for Frans and Mein Wijnakker. Let me tell you about Fretje for a moment. Fretje was not Dutch. She was a German Jewish girl. She was one of 6. 5 siblings with her. She and her brothers and sisters, you mentioned Kristallnacht before. That's the so-called Night of Broken Glass, the major riot in Germany and Austria before the war breaks out, targeting Jews. Well, shortly after that was over, late 1938, the Dutch government was willing to let in, the term was unaccompanied children, not families, as long as Dutch Jewish families would take care of them. We don't have to be involved. So a few thousand are able to get into the Netherlands, and Fretje and her siblings will never see their parents again. They'll be placed at the homes of Dutch Jewish families in Amsterdam, and life will go on. And Fretje will learn Dutch right away, go to school, have a good time, make friends with kids down the block. In fact, one friend that she would play with periodically was a girl similar in age to her, also of a German Jewish background, but this girl and her family were able to get out of Germany in the early 1930s when a whole family had that chance. They made a nice life for themselves in Amsterdam. When the occupation got bad, they got into hiding. But here was the problem. You want to stay hiding in Amsterdam or other major cities where the German presence, let alone the sympathizers and Anna's beers were all, your likelihood of surviving the war not good. This family gets caught. This was a girl named Anne Frank. Well, after being there for a week, Mean comes to Frans one day and says, I've been talking with Fretje. Frans, did you realize that she's Jewish? Frans said, yeah, I knew. Well, she's got a younger brother still hiding in Amsterdam. Go get him. So out in the train, Frans will go, and they're going to sneak out her younger brother and call him Fretje, not his real name. Now there's 2 Jewish children, refugees, in their home with their 4 little kids. A week or so later, through these 2 former teachers, through various acquaintances of theirs and Frans, they come out and they've heard about this Frans Wijnakker guy, and they come out to Dieden on the train with a girl of 17 who happens to be Jewish. And they bring her to the home of Frans and Mein Wijnakker and say, sure, bring her in. Now there's 3 Jewish children, refugees, part of their home. Do they recognize what they've gotten into? Because, by the way, it is illegal. We already talked earlier the consequences. Maybe not fully yet, but they're going ahead anyway. And now comes the pivotal moment. A stranger shows up on Frans' doorstep one day. He won't say what his real name is. He only goes by this code name, Long John. And he's starting to talk right away to Frans. And as he's talking ahead, he's making Frans very nervous initially, because he seems to know that Frans Wijnakker has 3 Jewish children refugees in his home. How's this guy know this? Frans is wondering. Is he a spy? Is he with the police to arrest me? Frans is getting nervous. And then this Long John fellow says this. You could be of help to us. Who is this guy? He's with the LO, the resistance group that helps people hide. Likely the Dr. Quains in Amsterdam, also part of the LO. They've been talking to this Frans Wijnakker guy, located countryside, good place, seems to be helpful. Let's see if we can get more from him. So Long John now starts to explain, and Mean has joined the conversation. You could be of help to us. We're trying to get the remaining Jews still hiding in the cities out. Love to get them out to the countryside where you live. Now certainly you can't fit them all in your own home. So here's what we'd like you to do if you're willing. We can fund an operation. We'd like you to go around the local towns in this area and see if you can recruit people to take somebody into their home, and then you can pay them for it. But I don't want to kid you. This will be risky, and this will be dangerous. But would you be willing to help? And Frans and Mean look at each other and without hesitation went, okay. Not exactly knowing what they're getting into, but they've been asked for help, and they want to be helpful. And so they go forward. And now this takes over their whole life, 24/7. Frans gets word of people being snuck out his way or to go in the cities to sneak them out. In the meantime, he's going around the local towns, recruiting people, seeing who might be helpful here. By the way, he would create good stories around it. The stories weren't true, but there was truth behind the stories. Due to the bombings in Rotterdam, or people sometimes were being pushed out of their homes in Amsterdam by the Germans who wanted them, or people would be getting ill, so he'd say they're coming out here to rest and recover. The good Lord would be well kindly if you take somebody into your home. And by the way, I can give you some money for it. During these hard times, people were willing to do those things. All the people, though, that he was helping place, from children to adults of various ages, were all Jewish. Although initially he didn't always tell people that. And he's getting people placed. But as this picks up, so do the challenges and dangers. When I reflect back on the many challenges and dangers that Frans will encounter with his wife Mean right there in support, I am stunned that they actually persisted. Most people would have quit. I have 4 little children to worry about. This is too dangerous. Go away. But they won't. And among the many challenges they encounter, I'm just going to highlight 2 briefly. 1, the term you'd hear is betrayed, meaning this. Frans had placed an individual in somebody else's home. Sooner or later they figure out that person's Jewish, but that wasn't the issue. But one day something happens. And they're calling for Frans. You got to come, you got to come. Frans, this person we have here got exposed. That means word will travel to the authorities very shortly, which means not only are they going to come get this person, Frans, they're going to come get us. We've been betrayed. Get them out of here. Frans could not convince those people to keep the individual any longer. Mad scramble. Now you got to try to find another place. At the height of this, Frans and Mean had often 8 to 10 Jewish refugees in their own home with their 4 little children. One crowded place. And the second, among many challenges, the other one I'm just going to highlight briefly, deals with the first adults that Frans and Mean took into their own home after the 3 children. It was a young married couple, similar in age to them. The husband came first. He's able to sneak out of Amsterdam early fall 1943. His name was Lou. Neat thing about Lou, he was an architect. And he will design and work with Frans to build within their house a hiding room. By the start of 1944, in that southeastern section of Netherlands where they lived, German presence starts to increase in that area. That hiding room was valuable to have. Now Lou's wife, Engeline, gets out of Amsterdam a short time after him. And through the LO, she gets placed out into southeastern Netherlands, and her point of contact there, a guy named Frans Wijnakker. And he placed her then at a home of a friend. They often did not want young married couples staying together. I'll let you explain that to your kids later. Well, after being there for nearly a month, Engeline was betrayed. Person came and said, I can't keep you any longer. You're going to have to go now. And it was near midnight. I'm told the home of Frans and Mein Wijnakker is maybe 20 minutes down the road. I was given directions. I've never been myself. Here you are. Take the directions and go. And there she is, Engeline, frightened, in a strange area, in tears, hoping these directions are correct. And about 20 minutes later, she's going down the road. She makes a guess and rings the doorbell. And luckily, she guessed right. Frans opens up the door, recognizes her, sees her there in tears, says, come on in. Well, that woke up the whole house. And amidst the commotion, who comes down to see what's going on? Her husband, Lou. A very emotional reunion. And the next morning, Frans and Mein Wijnakker say to Lou and Engeline, that's okay, you can stay here together. But a short time after that, Engeline has a secret she cannot keep secret any longer. She's pregnant. How do you have a baby under these circumstances? Near impossible. Well, when this was finally over, and this will go on not for just 2 weeks, not even for just 2 months, but for 2 years, Frans, with the support of his wife, Mean, will save the lives of over 24 Jews from certain death, and nobody will get caught. You can see, and we'll go to the next slide, you can see why they earn that honor of righteous among the nations, and there's their plaque that shows that. Now, the last thing that I'm going to cover, before I open up the floor to your questions, as you heard in the beginning, I also have a very meaningful personal connection to this story and its heroes, and I'm going to share that with you now. And to give you some insight into it, I'm going to read an excerpt from the book. So let me set up this piece first that I'm about to read. As I've been on this journey now for nearly 3 years, sharing the story in many venues and places, I've had a wonderful supporter helping me along the way, and here she comes down. It happens to be my wife, Leah Bars. Here she is. Fortunate to have her with me here. Well, it turns out that Leah and her family are actually immigrants from the Netherlands themselves. They immigrated to the United States when she was in the 8th grade, near 14 years old, to a place called Los Angeles. And after getting settled in, she initially made her mom nervous because she took to American television right away, and when she ever get off the couch, she'd do her homework. But she'll actually graduate from high school and even go on to university and graduate from a place called UCLA. And then in Los Angeles, she starts a career as a teacher there. And after a few years, she moved to San Francisco in Northern California continued her career in education, the bulk of it as a school psychologist, does very well, and along the way raises 2 daughters who are young adult daughters doing fine in their lives. Later in life, she picked me up. And now we're slightly over 7 years of what I'm always told is wedded bliss. Good crowd, there you go. I always have to do what I'm told. Very good. Now, May 2009. At this point in her life, it has been 25 years since she was last back to the Netherlands. And there's nobody left in the country anymore in terms of friends or family that she knows, but always a burning desire to go back to her original homeland and see places she never even got to see as a kid. And I had never been at all. She's been talking to me, we got to do it for a while, and then okay, we plan this special trip and we go for 6 weeks. And we're having a wonderful time traveling throughout the country, and then we stumbled into something by accident that I thought was so significant. I end up writing a letter to her 2 daughters, Shoshana and Alana, and that's the piece I'm going to read to you now. Oh, and one last thing before I do. If you knew her as a child in the Netherlands, less would you know her by her name Leah, and much more by her Dutch nickname Ineke. So please keep that in mind. Chapter 1, Historic Moment. Dear Shoshana and Alana, today is Tuesday, May 26, 2009. I'm writing to share more than just travel stories from a wonderful journey your mom and I are having. I want to document something to you that I hope you will find of much value for your own family history. Well, I know some of the history, and you probably do too. Coming in contact with the reality of it merges mind and heart into something of great significance. I will explain shortly. Being in the Netherlands, much more than in the United States, one is reminded of World War II and the Holocaust as well. When we started our trip in Amsterdam, we visited the Anne Frank House. It is a wonderful educational museum. Last Friday, we visited the museum and site of Camp Westerbork. Before World War II, there were 140,000 Jews who lived in the Netherlands. Over 75% perished during the Holocaust. Westerbork was the deportation center the Nazis used to ship the Dutch Jews off to the death camps in Poland. We arrived last evening in the city of Eindhoven in the south of the country. Now, the places your mom's family lived prior to immigrating to the U.S., Eindhoven was where they were the longest. Before arriving there yesterday, we stopped in an old town named Ravenstein. It is the big small town in an area of villages in a southern section of the country. It is also near where your grandparents were hidden during the war. As we stop and walk around the charming 1600s historic downtown of Ravenstein, all 2 blocks of it, we spot a tourist information office. We go in, and your mom asked the staff members about the location of an old church, we'll see it now, about the location of an old church, which is a vacant old church, in the nearby small town of Dieden, and if the home that once belonged to a Frans Wijnakker is still next to it. For the older folks of this area, which the 3 office people on hand were, the name of Frans Wijnakker is a notable one. They tell your mom not only how to get to this church, but also that one of the Wijnakker's sons still lives in this particular house. So off we go down the road to Dieden. About 10 minutes later, we find the church in question. We park our car there and walk over to the house next door. As we walk up the driveway, we see a few people sitting at a table in the front yard on this warm day, and we see, we'll show on the next slide, we see the word shalom written on the front side of the house, probably a foot in size. Your mom boldly walks up to the gentleman sitting there and says in Dutch, "Hello, I'm Ineke Bars." A roar goes up along with a warm handshake. This man and his wife sitting with him know who Ineke Bars is and much more the significance related to her. In the next few minutes, the Dutch starts flying and phone calls start happening. Within 10 minutes, his youngest sibling, Irene, drives over and joins in the lively discussion, which, by the way, is all in Dutch, so I can only watch. The man who has greeted us is Frans Wijnakker Jr. He is the youngest son of the aforementioned Frans Wijnakker. His father, Frans, with the support of his mother, Mean, saved your grandparents and your mom, baby Ineke, during World War II. They all survived the Holocaust because this Catholic man and his wife hid them and other Jews and helped even more hide from the Nazis. Do you recognize the significance of this moment? Frans, the son, and his wife, also named Irene, visited Israel themselves last year. They showed us a blown-up picture of the memorial plaque and tree planted in Yad Vashem's Avenue of the Righteous section in honor of their parents, which was when the historic significance of what I was witnessing really hit me. After visiting for over an hour, they've invited us to come back Wednesday evening. They have 3 other siblings who are all alive and live in the local area, so your mom will likely meet more of the Wijnakker family who she last saw 25 years ago. And now I'll open up the floor to your questions. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, and thank you for the wows and the oohs and ahs. Yes, yes. Applause is okay as well. Thank you, thank you. All right, what can I answer for you folks?
I got a question.
Please.
What was the logic of the Nazis sending people to the death camps rather than forced labor?
And some will be into forced labor, but yeah, the terms of that.
It just seems that they could have got more out of them by working them to death than just killing them.
Yes, yes.
It's a gruesome way of looking at it.
Yeah, but good question. And maybe logic's even not the right word because none of this is logical anyway.
Right.
Yeah. But here's the going. In many of the concentration camps, it was just slave labor doing useless things to let them slowly die and starve and work to death. Some are primarily death camps, although some people go into work. There'll be some people in those concentration camps that are actually working in nearby factories or businesses because they needed extra slave labor. Unlike the people in forced labor who are in Germany, they're not. But the primary focus, especially by the start of 1942, is get them all killed. Work them to death, shoot them to death, gas chamber, it's just get them all killed as fast as we can. That was the focus. That was what they thought their mission was. They thought they were doing a service to humankind. Even creating a museum of the destroyed Jewish race. They were hoping to get that established. All that thing. So there's no logic to it. But when hate leads the day, that's what happens. Good question. Thank you.
Paul, didn't they separate some of the people coming in so some of you work and others would go directly?
Yes, yes. Certainly as you got off the train, and especially at the death camps, the 6 major death camps, there was that selection process initially. Now, of course, the people who are going, they don't know why they're setting them. They're separating the men from the women to start with. But then they're doing the selection. You don't know when they say go left or go right, why, which line is better. Basically, if you're of a certain age, and I'll say by teenager to not past 40, you may be able-bodied that we can work you. Everybody else, we're sending you right away to the gas chambers. We're telling you you're going to showers. So that was part of what went into that. You don't know at the time, of course. If you can figure out, and you got people, little prisoners walking by, and they might whisper something to you, those who've ever read the book Night by Elie Wiesel, who gets off the train with father, he's 15, his father's 50. Someone's yelling at him, tell him you're 40. Don't say 50. Well, I'm 50. Don't, tell him you're 40. So he said 40. He stays alive for a little while longer. You can just, this is so inhumane. There's not logic to any of this. You're just hoping to survive. Yes, Tony.
After, the war came to an end.
Yes.
And, the Holocaust wrapping up and all of that, and, life trying to get back into, the healing, that, all of that.
Right.
Did the LO carry on?
No.
I mean, was there any help there for the Jewish people, to try to help them reestablish some semblance of life?
Good question. Because the resistance groups are over when the war is over.
Right.
And now as you have Jewish survivors come back or come out of hiding, here was the Dutch government's response. Don't help. We don't want to look like we're playing favorites. Now, Jewish social service agencies want to help the Jews coming back, that's okay. Don't look to us. Everybody suffered here anyway. Yes. It was a very tough time emotionally, let alone physically and economically throughout the country, and even worse for the Jews coming back. In fact, one of the sad stories that happens for some Jews, to save your children, you try to get them into hiding. And a Christian family takes them in. After the war, for some, all of a sudden you come back, and maybe you survived. One parent, maybe both if you were lucky, and now you want to be reunited with your children. Now, mind you, those children may not have seen you in 2, 3, 4 years. So the children, especially if they're young, don't necessarily know their parents. Some of those families didn't want to let the kids go. You end up having court cases where the Jewish parents are having to fight to regain their child, is so torn in the middle of all it. This is all part of what was going on. It was a very rough transition. It was not made easy. Thank you. Good question here. Steve.
What was the viewpoint of the Catholic Church there in the Netherlands?
Yes. There was not one viewpoint. I'll answer that in a couple ways. Now, the leading cleric in the country, Archbishop Johannes de Jong, he will speak out on occasion. against this, against what the Nazis are doing. And you don't see that very often throughout all of Europe, in any of the countries. So he was a more courageous man. But here was the problem for him when he did that. Now, the Nazis never touched him. But every time he spoke out in protest of this, there was always an extra roundup of Catholics who we think have Jewish heritage. So there was kind of little subtle reprisals, or not so subtle, for that. But that wasn't all that common. And let's take your question to the level where the Wijnakkers were. And I'll play Jeopardy now. So remember Jeopardy, you give the answer and you're answering a question. So here's the answer. He was the biggest thorn in the local area for Frans Wijnakker and his special work of trying to help save Jews. And the question was?
Who's the local parish priest?
Very good. Our winner, yes. Yes. Father Johannes Simons. He'll be a constant thorn to Frans in what he's doing. He doesn't know what's happening initially. But he's got to know his business is everywhere in the parish. And certain gossip and things, he's hearing things, so he'll confront Frans based on what he's hearing. And when Frans won't deny, you don't lie to the parish priest. Frans won't deny what he's doing. Holy cow, what are you doing? This is terrible! You know what's going to happen when the Germans come here, Frans? And he always could think about himself. They're going to string me up! Now, here's the good news with Father Simons. Luckily, the Germans never came in to interrogate him, because he would have sang like a canary. So that he knows what's going on. He just, whatever you're doing, just don't bother me. And a little side note to this, too, that I always find kind of interesting. We have been back to the Netherlands a couple times since. And on both occasions, we've come back to visit with the family, which we'll introduce you to shortly here. And one day, we were having a subsequent visit. Nellie, the oldest of the Wijnakker siblings who we stayed with, lent us her car one day. So we want to drive around and see some of the small towns in the area that we talk about in here. And we said, where are your parents buried? We want to go pay our respects. They're in Damon, one town over from Dieden, a nice little Catholic cemetery. Okay, we go. Pay our respects, nice gravestones to Frans Wijnakker, Mein Wijnakker. And one row over, who's buried there? Father Johannes Simons. So even in death, they couldn't get away from this thorn. So it's a mixed bag, basically, in terms of, and this is throughout Europe. You're not going to get, certainly from the Pope at this time, he was more quiet about all this. You're on your own. Some will have courage, many won't. That's how it worked, unfortunately. Good questions. Yes?
Was there any other families that did get caught in that local area?
Not so much in their local area, but in other parts of the country, yes. And certainly throughout Europe. If you were doing what Frans and Mean were doing, which is not a lot of people, your risk was dangerous. I'll give you an example. And they're also recognized as rights among the nations, a husband and wife, Albert and Louisa Streinstra. Here's what happened in their case. They're involved sometimes with non-Jews to help hide them and eventually get them on, and in many cases Jews as well. They'd hide in their home, a few here, a few there, and then sometimes get them transferred around. Now, this was about, I think, late 44. One of the things the German government was doing, especially in the cities, and this happened in Amsterdam, they would often push people out home and say, we want it for our needs, you're going. And by the way, you go over to this city, far away, and you have to take these people in home. So Albert and Louisa had to take this woman into their house. Well, she certainly sees that they're hiding a couple of Jews. She betrays them and calls the authorities, and a raid happens on the house. They're not able to prepare in time for the raid. They're surprised by it. Albert tries to resist. He's killed on the spot. Louisa bolds their 7-year-old daughter and gets out and escapes and stays hiding for the rest of the war. They did help. They got caught. The consequences were like that for people who do that. Yes, Corrie ten Boom, someone was about to mention. Yes, the hiding place. She and her family also get caught. She's out of the city in the West Harlem. We have visited their museum today. She gets to go to a concentration camp and watch her sister die next door. So it was, not everybody was, lucky enough like they were to at least survive this. It was very dangerous, which keeps many people ever from trying. Great question there. Yes, Steve.
Where was the funding for these resistance groups?
Good question.
Source of funding?
Well, and one of the problems for some of the other ones, they weren't much funded. The most funded group was the LO. What had gotten established within the Netherlands was a secret bank known as the National Support Fund. And the Dutch government in exile would channel a little bit of money into it. Many people throughout the country channeled money into it. And it was started by a man named Valraven van Hal. So he's kind of the primary banker running this. Very secret, dangerous work. When we found out just a few years ago now today in the Netherlands, and it just all came up in recent times, he's now viewed as one of the heroes of the Dutch resistance. And so through that group they could get funded. Now again, I'll even add before I come back to him, some of the Jewish adults, not all, and certainly not the children, occasionally had money themselves that could help pay for some of this too. but the funding the LO had because of the National Support Fund. Now, here's what happens to Walraven von Hall, by the way. He will not see his 40th birthday. He eventually gets captured by the Nazis and executed. So it was very dangerous and all that, but thank goodness they did have that did make a difference in helping here. Good question. I want to make sure we get this one. And this is Glenda Ann, if you would, please. Oh, all right.
So what happened when you came back for that visit with the family that Wednesday?
All right. That was Rez, right?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Rez. Good question. Good question. Well, I always like to answer that question in this context. And by the way, there's 5 Wijnakker siblings, 4 little ones during the war, and the 5th one, who you heard me read about, Irene, is born right after the war. And I always like to answer it first this way, because we had shown up unexpectedly. And if, let's say, you had a brother or sister living in the area, and they called you one day and said, so-and-so just came into town, remember her? Oh, yeah, it's been 25 years since we last saw her. Oh, yeah. She's going to be around for a couple more days. Could you come over tomorrow night to visit with her and her husband? This is the answer many people I know. Oh, I wish I could. If I got this obligation at work, this activity going on, these things with the kids, technology toys to play with. Sorry, send them my regards. Well, when the Wijnakker siblings heard, and they know my wife more by her nickname, Ineke, when they heard Ineke Bars was in town, please show them the next slide. There they are. All 5 came. They were not going to miss this moment. This was a very happy reunion, one of the pictures we have in the book. Very happy reunion. What was interesting for me that evening, and I'll introduce you to the family in a moment. Today, by the way, if you're an American, you travel in the Netherlands, easy country for Americans to travel in because the vast majority of Dutch speak multiple languages, English in particular. These folks who are in their 60s, 70s now, they grew up in the countryside, they don't speak much English at all. That night, and we were there for over 3 hours, the whole conversation was in Dutch. And I don't speak any Dutch then and a little bit today. My wife is fluent in Dutch. So even though that whole conversation I could not directly participate in, I never felt out of place. It was just very exciting to watch this very happy reunion of them catching up with one another. And my wife would translate some things for me or ask questions on my behalf. And let me introduce you to the family. On your right, oh, they're good. You got an arrow going there. And she becomes the point person for us that helps in the development of this book. Nellie. She's the oldest of the siblings. So that's now already 5 years ago, which is hard to believe. It seems like it was just yesterday. She doesn't look we just saw her last summer again. She didn't look different. She recently turned 76. She's going on 50. Good luck if you can keep up with her. Very warm, engaging, energetic lady. She had done a pilgrimage, one of these hundreds of miles of pilgrimages, Catholic pilgrimage to Spain. It's like, I don't know how anyone else does that, but she does it. Next to her, Frans Jr. lives in the actual house where all this took place. He owns it today. It was a rental during the days of their parents and when they grew up. And then, of course, you see my wife, and then next to my wife is the youngest, born after the war, Irene. You heard me read about her. And then the other 2 brothers, Jan and Thijs. Wonderful people, supported us doing this here. And I also mentioned, thanks to Rez's good question here, it's been 25 years since they last saw my wife prior to this accidental visit. Oh, you want me to explain why? Okay. They had last seen her in the summer of 1984, and why was she there? She was living in San Francisco at the time. Well, her parents still had some contact with Frans. Mean had passed away. But the official recognition of righteous among the nations had come. And the local towns woke up and said, we have a hero in our midst. We should honor him. And so they did that summer. They put on a parade and a dinner festivity, a wonderful weekend. Well, who flew over from San Francisco with her then 5-year-old daughter and was even part of the parade? Ineke Bars. And then life got in the way. You live way far away, there's no internet, having a career, raising kids. And then we have this accidental visit 25 years later. And a neat part of our journey with the story has been for her and for me as well, the reconnection with the family. And I said, we've been back twice since and spent time, stayed with Nellie both times, and spent more time with the family. Even met some of Nellie's kids as well, the next generation down. So thank you for your question. Yes?
Has there been any other contact with people that they saved or that they've told you guys about?
Yeah, good question. It's Justin? Darren, thank you. Yes. Now, interesting, as we go back eventually, and the story takes about 1.5 years before it's finally developed, and we go back to the family to do some research and interview. Most of the people that they know, they didn't necessarily maintain contact with most of them anyway, but they said most that we know of have passed away. There may be a few alive, and one for certain that they knew very well. And they actually gave us her address. Fraitia. Remember who Fraitia was? Who was she? Very good, very good. And it's interesting, too, in the journey of developing the story, not that I know I'm going to do a book initially. And by the way, the family had actually given us this little self-published Dutch book. And what they told us is prior to his death, Frans had spoken into some tapes about his experience of what he did during the war, and a friend of the family put together a little self-published Dutch book. Irene, the youngest there, is the keeper of the book, and she gave it to us. It was like a jigsaw puzzle with pieces missing. But when we came home that summer, my wife kind of put out the raw translation and then said this. Today she goes, I know why I said this. See what you can do with this. Well, over time, because I'm just doing it as a little side project, I'm putting together, doing historical research, but you still need to get pieces filled in. We eventually go back to the family in Nellie as our point person, and we start asking some questions, do a long-distance interview. This was early April 2010. And she could answer some questions, and this was her answer to other questions. I don't know, ask Fraitia. Maybe more think of her that name. That's not her real name. They gave us her address. Her real name is Shula Schwartz. She lives in Haifa, Israel. There's serendipity in the story. A little piece I read to you, people often say, there's serendipity here, and here's the serendipity continuing. It was already on our schedule. We were going in just a couple of weeks to Israel. Late April 2010, in person, we met Shula Schwartz. What a wonderful lady. She's now 86, just turned 86 last month. This is just now a few years back. We were going to spend one evening with her. We spent 3 days with her. She wouldn't let us go. All the best reasons you didn't want to go. And we gained a lot more insight from her to your question. Yes, in particular her. Most of the others have passed away. She has a sister that was helped that also still is alive. Her brother Fraitia, not his real name, Avraham, he passed away a few years ago. Just to even add a little bit more about Shula, back to what this really means. Here's her life. Now 86 in the twilight of her years, but still doing well. She had a 50-year marriage, because after the war she does get into Israel and makes her life there. 50-year marriage, wonderful marriage, unfortunately a widow today. 3 children, 13 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. Thank God. Thank you for your question, Darren. Other questions here before we wrap up shortly? Anything else I can answer? Well, good questions. Well, let's make sure we get the last question that I always like to pull things together. And what is your name over here?
Lena.
Say again?
Lena.
Lena? Okay, and you have glasses, so maybe you're prepared, if you would.
So whatever happened with that baby?
Could everybody hear her?
So excuse me. So whatever happened to that baby?
Ah, good question, good question. And remember that last challenge I mentioned with the young married couple who's pregnant? That's the baby you're referring to. Thank you for your question. All right. We'll see again if you're not allowed to answer, Tony. Did you watch the whole video all the way through?
No, I didn't want to spoil it all.
All right. So, all right. Oh, you didn't? Okay. So you're eligible. Some of you may know the answer. All right, let's just see. Anyone think they know the answer? You think you know, Roger? Who? Jessica? Giselle? The one in the red hair? Oh. You think my wife? Really?
Or your brother?
Oh, or my mother. Ah, we got multiple choice going here. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, good, good. Could be. Well, here's the answer. I'll keep it brief. Chapter 9. That takes care of it. There you go. Yeah. All right. Now we got to sort that out. No, not my mother.
Okay.
But I brought the baby with me here today, and yes, I even married the baby myself. And here she is. When I say I have a very meaningful personal connection to the story and its heroes, it doesn't get any more meaningful and personal than this, folks. I want you to understand what this is because I understand the depth of it far more today. I knew about my wife's beginning before we even were married. But I didn't understand the full of what went into it, let alone she is too, learned in terms of all that Frans and Mean did. Well, when you recognize what was going on, because these are her parents, when they moved to the United States, her mother will anglicize her name to Lynn. Lou and Lynn Bars, her parents. She's pregnant. They've come in hiding. This is a huge dilemma for Frans and Mein Wijnakker, because you can't take her mother to the local hospital and have the birth done there. Because, regular hospital, that's all the authorities, the records, all the authorities will know this. Her mother would have been shipped to a concentration camp quickly, no baby born, it's over. So they had a huge dilemma. And in fact, so Frans and Mean actually turned to their contact with the LO. What do we do here? He said, well, you could make arrangements to send her away, but I'll tell you what, we're not going to tell you what to do. We're going to leave it up to you, to Frans and Mean, to you guys decide. So they decide, all right, we won't send her away, not split up the family. But how are we going to do this?
Deliver it.
Well, and often a good guess. Well, more the guess is you'd get a doctor or midwife to come into the house.
Or just do it yourself.
Well, that was a little more than what they maybe could do, yeah. But to the same idea. They weren't capable of doing it directly themselves. They never viewed that. But the idea related to what you're getting at that people often would suggest is, get a doctor midwife to the house. And in the small town area, a lot of births were done at home anyway. They couldn't do that. How come? They already had 8+ Jewish refugees in their house. The exposure to bring anybody else into the house, don't take that chance. You can't do it. You can see the dilemma they had. They could have done nothing. They could have sent her away. Now, I'm not going to tell you how they did it. But I'll share just this little insight with you. Frans and Mean came up with a strategy, although not sure how they're going to execute it when they came up with it, and they shared it with her parents who agreed to it. And this was the strategy. However we get that baby born, when we do, we will register her with the authorities as our child, so she could be a baby with our small children rather than a baby in hiding. Well, as I mentioned, we've been back a couple times since to visit with the family, staying with Nellie there on the far right, both times. And our first visit there, spring of 2011, as we were leaving, and Nellie speaks just a little bit of English, and this is when you know you've had a good visit, because as we were leaving, she says to me in English, "When are you coming back?" And then she says to my wife in Dutch, with tears in her eyes, and she hugs her very closely, this is the English translation, "Goodbye, my war sister." They're very proud of their parents because their parents performed a miracle. I get to enjoy this miracle every day, and so I say, thank God for the courage and compassion of Frans and Mein Wijnakker. Thank you all. What a great audience.